Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 228th New Social Environment. I'm Henry Addison, a production assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Shirin Neshat Shoja Azari and our host, Charles Shafaieh. We're also thrilled to have the poet Ben Fama here, who will read to close today's program. And now to begin, I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation, the traditional owners of Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters on which we stand. The Brooklyn Rail stands in solidarity with the uprisings in response to the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McAtee, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, Toyin Salau, Walter Wallace Jr., and countless others we have lost to white supremacy and police violence in this country. And we acknowledge that justice will come from the streets, from the nation demanding accountability and refusing to move on until Black Lives Matter in the eyes of the state. And so before we introduce our host, I'd like to begin with a brief moment of silence. Thank you. And now to introduce today's host. Our host is Charles Shafaieh, an arts journalist and critic whose writing on theater, visual art, literature, film, and music has appeared in numerous international publications. Originally from Montana and now based in New York City, he writes regularly on opera and architecture. With the Brooklyn Public Library, he also co-curates Lit Film, an annual film festival focused on writers. And before handing the floor to Charles, we are going to begin with a clip.
Thank you. So you're in the army?
Yeah, I was there.
For how long?
Too long, way more than I care to remember.
Some really amazing photographs.
Yes, I was there for that one.
Actually, do you mind if I just ask you one more favor?
I guess so.
Would you tell me your last dream?
My last dream. You know, it's always the same dream. Same place, same time. No, it isn't a dream. It's a nightmare. There's this whitish blue light that shoots across the sky, you see. Black smoke rises to form a cloud that covers the sun. I can now look at the sun directly with naked eyes from behind the black smoke. I hear people screaming. The sun is gonna fall. The sun is gonna fall. A strong wind sweeps across the land. The air is full of dust and flying objects. And then there's silence. Dead silence. The sun has died behind the deep black cloud as it starts to rain. Black rain. Raindrops of oil and grease fall from the sky. It is then that you hear the voices of people in agony.
Charles, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. And I would like to introduce the two esteemed guests that we have today. That Shirin Neshat is an internationally renowned photographer, theater artist, and filmmaker. Born in Qazvin, Iran, she has spent the majority of her life in America, principally in New York City. From her photography series, Woman of Allah in the mid-1990s, to video installation work such as Passage with Philip Glass and Illusion and Mirrors with Natalie Portman, to films such as the Silver Lion winning Women Without Men, she constantly examines issues related to gender, religion, the public and private, Iran, America, and the political. And we're also joined by Shoja Azari, who is also an Iranian-born visual artist and filmmaker whose work confronts broad themes of gender, politics, and piety. A longtime partner of Shirin's, with her, he has created Women Without Men and other films such as Looking for Kulthum and the forthcoming Land of Dreams, the subject of a current exhibit at the Gladstone Gallery in New York City, and the subject of our conversation today, and part of which the video installation we just saw a clip from. So welcome to both Shirin and Shoja. Thank you for joining us. And I think the first point of conversation, I think maybe would be just to have both of you describe this suite of projects, all of which are translations of one idea called Land of Dreams, with photographs and video installation and a film that's currently being edited.
First of all, hello to everyone who is choosing to spend this lunchtime with us. And thank you, Brooklyn Rail. Thank you, Charles. As most people know, all of my work up to now has always been surrounding the issues of Iran, my country, or the Middle East. So I've never really made any work that relates to the American culture. But in the past several years, I just felt a strong urge to make a project that sort of more or less projects my experience as an Iranian immigrant in this country. And, you know, like all my work have been very personal and never autobiographical, but using my experience as in what I love and dislike about this country and the direction that was moving, and just offering a perspective of an immigrant. It's a lot to say about this project, but one of the issues that was for me very interesting was to play very allegorically about this issue of whether this narrative, the video, took place in Iran or in the US. This sort of blurring the boundaries in terms of the geopolitical and you know, Iran is a place of fantastic desert landscape, just like the Southwest. And just like some of my earlier videos that were also about these notions of opposites, you have the, you know, dream reality, the, you know, American culture versus the Iranian society, and then this woman who just sort of goes in between the two realms, and that she's a photographer and she's an Iranian living in exile, obviously my own alter ego. So just like she does in the video, I personally went to New Mexico, a place that Shoja and I and our colleagues chose, where I went and visited people door to door, or sometimes recruiting people from various corners to photograph them, and I explained about myself, and I asked them that if they could share with me their latest dreams and nightmares. So it's really a very complex project that I think for many of us that were Iranians working in New Mexico, what you see both in the photographs and the video, it's really something that we experienced in process. I couldn't explain more about that. And Sheila Van, the fantastic actress, she basically herself is an immigrant from Iran and of a much younger generation. And so, and now we're just editing the movie version of Land of Dreams.
Could you also explain a little bit about what we were seeing on the right channel? That kind of, why is she asking for the dreams and taking the photographs?
Yeah, for those friends who haven't seen the video, the narrative evolves around this very claustrophobic interior space of an industrial space that is basically sort of a bunker inside of a mountain, that it's a sort of a political satire, absurdity of a group of men and women, Iranian, wearing lab coats, are receiving and analyzing and interpreting American people's dreams, our enemies, as we in Iran forever since the Islamic Revolution have had this rhetoric of America as our greatest enemy. And she's sort of a spy, an agent that travels on daily basis from this bunker and goes to this middle lower class town. And she visits people from different facets of economic and ethnic background. And consequently, they have very distinct dreams and nightmares. And then she brings them back, both the portraits and the dreams. And basically, during this process, she becomes emotionally very invested in her subjects, that it's the sort of the forbidden fruit, and she gets kicked out of the bunker. But again, it's this all a work that is created somewhat of a documentary, but pure fiction and satire and surrealism, really.
So this idea of the land of dreams, I think you could almost call that a synonym for America in some ways, especially with the whether it's we're talking about dreamers or just the American mythology of the American dream. But in many ways, it seems, just as we saw in the clip with this retired army veteran, that the other dreams are equally violent, equally traumatic in different ways. That in the dreams, at least in the video installation that is on display at Gladstone's, that this is perhaps you discover an American nightmare rather than an American dream. Is that
one of the
intentional?
One of the I've been very interested in dreams. I've been very interested in magic realism, surrealism, but the past few years, I feel that in dreams are the only time that we're completely naked and truthful, and dreams cross boundaries, and dreams are innocent. And what's ironic is that the dreams of people in America, or nightmares, it may not that be different than someone in Iran. The fear of Holocaust, violence, abandonment, displacement, violence, as you said. These are, especially in light of the pandemic, our fears are very global. And just to add to what you said earlier is that I grew up in a country originally during the Shah where we looked at America as a land of dreams. We thought of America as a picture of perfection, of democracy and all of that. And I've been exiled for many years now. And I felt a sense of security in this country that I think for the past few years, maybe sort of that went under question. And that was what compelled me to make this project. So I think, ironically, in this video, in this project, you see that the two very opposing cultures are beginning to look alike.
And Shoja, who you wrote the video installation, I'm not entirely sure. I know you collaborated with Jean-Claude Carrière, the acclaimed scriptwriter for many Buñuel films and many other films, but obviously, you're a head writer on this. So could you talk about the kind of choice of these dreams, one of which preceded the one in the clip, which is about a woman having her home kind of invaded by children and a religious icon destroyed, and then another about a woman, a Native American woman, who's losing her child and also being torn away from her child and her people in metaphoric and literal ways, and then a final one which is about the loss of land and a kind of rejection of one's home and one's land. And how did you construct these dreams, and what was the significance of these four as a suite together?
Well, I mean, the project it started with actually Shirin coming up with a story that is about this woman who works for census and goes around to Iranian woman, census worker, born in Iran, but living in America, and goes around collecting people's dreams. And then this was passed to Jean-Claude, who created a story around that, basically, with three main characters, two male characters and one female character. And then we started to work on that. At the beginning, it was basically, the idea was to start shooting the film and then also create the videos from that process, which I kind of objected, and I said that it would become messy, and it has been very difficult because we have done that before. So we started to separate these two things. But the main idea basically is about immigration, is about this America as, especially for us Iranians, you know, we have a hate and love relationship with America. It has been a very muddy kind of relationship, because if you go to Iran, Iranians are truly in love with what America stands for. You know, we, as Shirin said, we all grew up with this basically notion that you know, imitating and kind of like wanting that what America stands for. But at the same time, the political history of intervention, of meddling, and all of that has created a great resistance and great, you know, like basically conspiracy among around the idea that America has been detrimental in dismantling democracy in Iran, forestalling progress and all of that. So that kind of psyche of an Iranian basically was the core of the development of this story. And the overall idea was basically for us as artists, and for Shirin in particular, is that our commonalities, what we experience together, especially in the age of anxiety that we're living in, and with the background of like this 30 some years, 40 years of conflict, is way more common when you go to the level of, you know, on the level of people, actual daily living, that we share much more than what the political system is presenting. So, you know, so there's like the first dream is the old man's dream, which is about nuclear holocaust. Basically, that's what it is, which was relating to the idea of like Iran being like, you know, developing nuclear weapon and all of that, you know, in the background of a political war that was going on. Meanwhile, it was the Americans that actually threw the first atomic bomb, and they have a huge nuclear arsenal. And the text was taken directly. The dream of the man is directly from a survival of Hiroshima. You know, a person who, a man who experienced the bomb as it fell. So it was directly taken from that, from the memories of that man, basically. So it wasn't written by me. It's really directly that. And so it was. The first dream is basically about that. And then if you look at the Iranian colony, what they're doing, it's like the idea is that it's a hidden, almost the intention was that the location would be a nuclear facility where they're in a bunker and they're working on, like, you know, secretively, maybe, you know, on a nuclear bomb, right? So it was kind of an absurd and indirect reference to the political dynamic of this, but in a sense, coming to the level of its humanity and the shared, basically, fear of this, which was experienced by the man who was a military man, and also Simin, who was going around and collecting dreams. And in general, the rest of the dreams are about violence. You know, it's like this, you know, this woman who has lost her town, her village, and was destroyed, and was, as a result, as a refugee, ended up in America, basically, but in isolation, you know. So it's basically the story of being, you know, pretty much ripped apart, you know, you know, about the land of immigrants in America, and this story of the violence and that is ripping every community around the world around under the guise of this facade of, like, liberation, democracy, and whatnot that is being exported. So every dream is related to that, in a sense, you know.
And the finale of the video installation involves the fact that the woman Simin is identifying too much with one of the dreamers, the one who's a refugee, as you just described. And she has a confrontation with a kind of head of this colony, or some sort of bureaucratic leader of this colony. And you see how she's turning she keeps saying I and she intermittently, and she can't quite tell. And it also is presaged in the beginning of the film that she's identifying with the photograph of the woman who we later find out is the woman with this dream. And that's so counter in many ways, both to an American idea of individualism and the kind of idea of the stabalist idea of the individual, but also into the Iranian antagonism against identifying with Iranian governmental antagonism against identifying with the enemy in this sense, in this discourse. And I'm curious how you see in other ways. This reminds me also of another anecdote of a friend of mine who had Margaret Atwood, for example, sign The Handmaid's Tale back when it came out, and he asked her something about you know, where is this based, and she said at the time that the only two places that she could imagine this happening are Iran and in America. Yeah. So this goes back, I don't know how many years that is, 40 years or more. And so do you have any thoughts about this way of potential, I mean, specifically the kind of American individualism idea, and the hesitancy which you also see in the first scene when Simin encounters a person at the door, and she asks, you know, basically, can I come in? Can I take your photo? And the woman, before she even hears anything, she says, no, don't come in. And in many ways, this has to do with how we approach the stranger and how we welcome the stranger or don't welcome the stranger. And how do you see that playing out in your lives today under, we're now no longer under Trump, but this idea of keeping the separation between the two cultures as so firmly defined. Shirin or Shoja, whoever.
Shirin, you want to?
Yeah, I just want to, it's interesting you brought this up because I want to remind our friends that we come from Iran, where it's a country of dictatorship, and we live with an intense fear of authority, even when we live outside. Even what we say and the work that we do would resonate and go back to the government of Iran, and how, for example, our families could be at risk or they could come after us here. So this imminent sense of anxiety, fear of the government, of the authority, of that bearded man, like the one of the judge in the colony, it's really something that I think in my lifetime I've lived with. We're that generation that lives in constant state of anxiety, and we have sort of accepted it in a very odd way, where in Iran people constantly we have to lie or do because everything against the law, and even as artists, we have to be very careful. There's censorship, so you have to be very carefully subversive, but be careful how you say it. So just to give you a background that, this is what the Iranian colony, like what Shoja represented, as Shoja just said, it represents for us this atmosphere that's very Kafkaesque, and but it's this authoritarian, this theocratic society that nothing makes sense, but they turn people into robots, and devoid of emotion. I mean, obviously is an exaggerated, stylized work. But back to this country, I think that, I felt always this great freedom in this country that, I did feel a certain sense of security and safety, especially once I had an issue with my country where I was being interrogated, and I got in the plane luckily. And as soon as I got inside the airport at John F. Kennedy, this African-American man in the costume told me, "Welcome home." And I remember just sobbing because I just come from my own country where they were just practically taking me away. And here I was being welcomed by an African-American and of an Iranian. So just the quality of the sort of security that we felt here is just immense. And I think that goes for many other type of immigrants who don't really have a way of return to any place else. And that being jeopardized, it was a really heavy issue for us. And this idea of individualistic lifestyle, and I must say that we live like a tribe, Shoja and I, and the way we work, and I've never even learned to live that truly American lifestyle, and that the way we work, the way we live, it's very tribal. So even though we've been away for so many years, certain aspects of our upbringings doesn't seem to escape us. Yeah, there was something unrelated that I wanted to say that I think is important to point out is, for me, this relationship between photography and dreams. And I think there's a poetry in this very melancholic work where I always see photography as a way of freezing time, is that something that becomes permanent, where with dreams it vanishes quickly, so ephemeral. And there's something about this photographer taking people's portraits but asking for their dreams, this paradoxical, to me, it's really powerful. And I can't explain it. And I think that's really an inherent part of the concept.
And another part of this, and we'll show the photography, so everybody listening, we'll show some photographs in a little bit and look at the way that this is translated also into photographs. But one other thing about dreams, which I think is intriguing also, that as the dreamers are telling their dreams, some of them almost seem surprised when they begin recounting. The tone of their voice is it's not as if they have this quick response of, oh, this is my dream that I had. It's kind of conjuring it back up. And this idea that in our dreams, we're almost immigrants to our own selves, and an inability, it counters this firm idea that we can know ourselves and in this individualistic sense that we were just talking about. And I'm curious if you have any sense of this, if that had anything to do with the kind of universalizing of this story. I mean, yes, it takes place in America and with an Iranian colony through the fact that they're speaking Persian, but how do you, whether that element speaks to you or any other ways in which you saw this as a universal story rather than a critique of America or of Iran specifically?
So you want to say?
Sure.
I just want to say that when I went to New Mexico to do the research, we made sure to meet some local communities like the Native Americans at the Navajo Nation. And by the way, all these years and years that I've been in this country, I never met a Native American. And we try to exchange stories and our histories as, you know, me as an immigrant and us as Iranian immigrants and them as people who were foreigners in their own home. And we talked about the value of dream and dream catching in their native culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just very profound. And in fact, one of the dreams is of the Native woman is the sense of abandonment in a convent, you know, and they told me how systematically the government would remove the children from their family and would take them to the convent from age 7 until, like, you know, after high school. So they would force them to forget their religion and their language, and they would convert them to Christianity. And how these individuals I was talking to always were angry at their parents. They never understood that the parents didn't have a choice, you know. Their stories and how that manifested in dreams, etc. And I just realized that some of the stories I was being told by them really resembled our stories and nightmares from Iranian government, the anxieties and the separation of families and the way I was 17 since I was pulled apart from my family, you know. And it was just so odd that we shared the same human experiences and pain and then later talking to the Latino community, the Mexican immigrants that lived in Albuquerque, a great number of them were extremely poor, and listening to them and their stories. So I must say that, you know, through this project and their collection of their dreams and interviewing them, I felt so bonded for the first time in America with an immigrant community that, being in the East and West Coast, I've never had that encounter. And I felt, an extreme affinity with what issues they were facing and what that somehow prevailed in their dreams and nightmares, which is really a projection of our anxieties, to me.
Yeah, in many ways, it seems, to bring the political more explicitly into the conversation, that you seem to be responding, you both seem to be responding less to a specific regime than to the psychological condition occasioned or caused by authoritarianism or fanaticism or in any form, whether that's Trump or Khomeini or Americans against Native Americans, American government against the Native Americans for centuries. And I'm curious, Shoja, maybe you can chime in about the importance of all of this is done quite obliquely rather than an explicit criticism or commentary on either America or Iran. It's almost the films seem like they're actually in a kind of dream space themselves in many aspects. And I'm curious, when we see, especially during the pandemic, there's so many works of art that are already being created, films or literature on Netflix or other places that are, you know, pandemic films, or even, you know, things about Trump that have already come out, that the power, instead of doing something from an oblique angle and not so explicit about the issues and how, whether is that a more timeless and universal way of approaching things, or how is it more powerful? Because I believe it is more powerful in what you've done than had you just decided to talk about America and Iran in a very explicit way.
No, I think, you know, talking about America and Iran is an excuse to delve into subjects that are much deeper. of course, so that's really the facade. And the subject matter is human life, right? I mean, us as beings, as simply being humans. And I think that the greatest, if we look at the political dimension of this, I think what one could label correctly is disruption, right? I mean, it's really, and we feel it in Iran and in the third world countries, in the underdeveloped countries, most because of like this force that has created a great epoch disruption, that the communities have been fallen apart, that this the force of capitalism coming, creating markets, pushing individualism, and individualism, call it consumerism, really. And all the attached values of like liberty and all of that, of course, that's part of the historical progress, but really it's tied to the forces of market and consumption, right? So that's why there's such a disregard for the fabric of the community and way of life, that has become completely disrupted. And so you could see similarities of that, which is very ironic in a sense that, as Shirin was saying, that you go and talk to the Native Americans and you feel that their history and what they went through is very familiar. It's the same, because it was like this force of interruption that take over and destroy and make it commoditize the entire community and the land and everything that is attached to that. So I think that's the larger issue, right? And then it's the same. It's the same for every, on the facade of this individualistic culture and the liberty of individual and all of that is really like nothing but that disruption in the human life again, and even for Americans, this destruction of community structure, that we as the human beings cannot live without, So this, isolation in America, this alienation that goes along with it, and that you encounter in this film. There's a military man that is extremely isolated and alienated. Every character is alienated, and then you see it with COVID. Why America and the West is like really so much worse hit by this COVID crisis, and why there's such a anger in some part of the population and all these conspiracy theories, because the fabric of the community, because this force of consumption and consumerism and extreme individualism without any sense, without any kind of respect for dignity of humans, has created this illusion of freedom, but in essence, it's nothing but alienation. And then when a disease like this comes, it rips it apart, and you feel that, okay, what are you going to do? You're going to it becomes conspiracy. They're lying to you. There's no virus at all, So I think, so this is, I feel that's really this film, especially the feature version, the film version of it, really delves into these aspects of what it is, what has happened to us,
But I want to add to this, what Shoja said, is the nature of the work that we're doing and why that the work is so enigmatic, as you said. And I just want to explain to our friends, particularly American friends, that I think that sometimes puzzles a lot of people, why so much metaphors and use of allegory in expressing anything like we do. And I think the language of magic realism, surrealism, even the use of dreams it seems to come very natural for people who live in societies that, such as Iran, where there is such, heavy use of censorship and lack of freedom of expression. And I realized that even someone like myself that lived outside of Iran for so long, I think like a poet. I never can say anything overtly because, again, that element of fear that I might just be crossing the boundary. And something about magic realism, surrealism, and dreams is that its logic doesn't make sense. Nothing makes sense. You could kill someone in a dream, but you're innocent. But there's all these references to reality, to history, to people places you have been. And you could make very profound, politically charged points, but still delve into it through enigma. And I think the Iranian people, Iranian artists, filmmakers have become a master of that, how to be subversive and not break the rules. And so I because you asked about that earlier, and I think this seems to be a natural inclination for people like us. And we really love it. That's become a way of making art.
It's a very different, the dream logic and poetic logic functions in very similar ways, and the construction of the dream and the construction of the poem. And I think, my father being from Iran, that I've known since I was very little about the ways in which arguably maybe Russians, I think, are the only other ones that come close in terms of how much everybody in Iran knows poetry, and you have streets named after poets, and in a kind of natural way of anybody from any walk of life can recite, which also is helped by the fact that the language hasn't changed for 700 or so years, and that's so much against, in many ways, the kind of American dogmatism of reason and clarity. And in a lot of Europe as well. But although, as Shoja pointed out, in terms of a lot of what's happening now, we've thrown reason and clarity out the window, apparently, with QAnon and all sorts of things. So I'm not exactly sure how that meshes together. But actually, one thing that you just said, Shirin, which it might be a good segue into the photographs, is that what you're doing here with cinema through the kind of meta commentary on the process of that, it's very subversive in the sense that you don't know what kind of video you're watching. It's at times it seems like it's a road movie, a Western, as the music we heard, Mozart Namju's music is a kind of Western style, but then later it's a more classical Persian style. It's a political satire. It's a science fiction movie in some respects with what's happening in this bunker. And I'm curious, what you were trying to do in terms of ungrounding. Was it ungrounding the audience with this kind of intermixing of genres, or was it your critics, who I know are quick to pigeonhole you into certain categories? What kind of intentions did you have behind this? Oh, you're still muted.
Sorry. I come from making work like a woman of Allah that was extremely political. So I was subjected to serious criticism from Islamic Republic of Iran to the critics of the Western world to the Iranian people. And I think slowly part of the reason I've gravitated toward a much more conceptual, abstract work, and like we said, surrealist work, dreams, is to stay away from those direct judgments that reduces the work to something that it's really not of my interest. And because I'm not a political activist, like I said, I consider myself a poet that is deeply interested in the reality of the time that we live in. I'm not interested in making timely, relevant work as well. So what I'm really interested in making work that 100 years from now will have the same resonance. And it's really about humanity, really is about emotions. And in that, there's the good and bad, the pain, and yet the incredible, beautiful aesthetic that I intervene through the use of my hand, by the cinematography, the use of music, all of that we add to the work to to make it appealing to the audience. But the work is often very disturbing and very often touches on issues of violence and a very painful material. And so just taking you now into the photography, my intention was really do the same thing to the photographs, the portraits. By the way, I only make portraits in photography, that the video did, which is basically collect a group of the group of people that, in my opinion, created a portrait of America. This is what America looked like. And the salon-like, I don't know if you can show some of the images, the salon-like style of the hanging was not about individual photographs that mattered, but the group of photographs that together created one piece. And that in there were people who were functional, dysfunctional, poor, middle class, rich, men, women, African American, Hispanic, Native American, to Anglo, and so this diversity that I feel that is an essential part of the American identity, and that's how I saw it. So I wanted the viewer to walk into this space surrounded by 110 photographs, and their gaze on them, on the audience, to feel these emotions that is undescribable. And they're so beautiful. These people are so dignified, and whether they're homeless or they're mentally handicapped, or the natives or the white or black, and so with that idea, my intervention also with the calligraphy. Someone said to me the other day, when I walk into this room, I feel sadness. I would say I feel melancholy, that it is a sad moment in America, but also that there is something deeply mystical about these faces, that and that the writing that I then inscribed on the photographs were, the results of my interviews with each individual, who they are and where they came from, but also their dreams. And then together with our friends that work with me, we referenced a book that is an ancient book in the library of Tehran in Iran, that it's sort of a rough, sort of loose interpretation of dreams categorically. And some of the images that were illustrated, they were like this sort of mysterious, strange beings that were, let's say, half snake, half cow, things that only appeals to us in a dream. So I felt that, while these individuals gave me their time to photograph them and sort of capture who they are in a photograph, my intervention was then put our hands and labor of writing. And I'd never ever done Persian calligraphy on Western subjects.
And I'm curious what the importance of those who know your work, what importance you might see in it, and what if the cause was anything in particular of why, unlike your other subjects that have the inscription of the text on the skin, this one uniquely, I believe, is on the background of the image rather than on the body. What was the cause of that, or what do you see? Shoja, if you'd like to also add anything about, after Shirin, the importance of that choice.
I think in this series, Charles, I felt there was a turn in my work. If before I did self-portraits or took pictures of my muses or friends, this time I played the role of a reporter. I took myself and placed myself in places that I photographed real people. These were not models. These were not, these are average citizens. And I had to engage with them. And I only got to know them momentarily. So what was almost written in their background was what my interpretation and my intervention, my report about them. And so, but I never felt that I could write on their faces. I think this is all very intuitive. Maybe Shoja has an interpretation about that I don't. But generally, I felt that in this series, and for the past couple of different series that I've done, I really do take almost a documentary sort of role in the project, where I literally travel to like Egypt or Azerbaijan, and I draw real people from the communities, and I talk to them and I get to know them. But what is written then in here is what I collected and what my interpretation is about them. I don't know, Shoja, do you have a different reading about this?
Well, my feeling is that basically once you're displaced, once, you know, or you're, as in our case, in exile or any kind of displacement, creates distance. You know, that's you're never at home with anything. Basically, you're always, wherever, a voyeur, an observer of the culture you're in from a distance, and also observer of the home that you left behind. You know, they're in a state of limbo, and to me, these photographs represent that. It's a person looking from a distance, and that's why the writing goes to the background. You know, so you know, it's basically, you know, it's, you don't feel like, you know, you could go that close to the flesh in a sense, you know. But you could see this in a broader sense, that probably that subject herself or himself has never that kind of awareness, because that distance is not there. That's, you know, that's my interpretation of these works, you know.
It draws
but Charles, I just wanted to go back to what you were saying about poetry and all of that. Just very quick. I think that, you know, and this is an often conversation that I have with Shirin, especially on writing film scripts, right? On the bigger projects, not art, because art is much freer. But when it comes to narrative structure of film, it becomes a little bit more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is always a dilemma, right? So we come from like at least the narrative structure in the East or in Iran has never been a 3-act structure. You know, it's been a lot of metaphors and also very episodic. It's as of like 1001 Nights, you know. One story begins and it never ends, and then it appears 200 pages later in another story, and it's story within a story within a story. So it doesn't have that kind of arc of the three-act structure. But ultimately, the audiences now, they're very, like, you know, they're so tuned into this kind of 3-act structure, and it becomes very confusing or dissatisfying to them. So it is pretty much like, you know, like for us, is a challenge to find that balance of like how you could like have a narrative that could take the audience on a journey that is familiar, but also like not abandon that kind of beautiful story within a story, storytelling, you know.
I mean, in many ways, the photographs represent a kind of multiplicity of stories in one way, that the text is their story that you've translated. So there's a remove from the translation of the dreams, and the dream is at a double remove then from the dreamer, because as we discussed earlier, the kind of way in which the dream as foreign to the individual, the dreamer as an immigrant into their own unconscious, is a little bit emblematized here by the virtue of them not able to read their dream, even though they probably won't be able to interpret the Persian. It's a extension of that metaphor, but that in many ways that's the same. That the dream represents the individual as much as the image of the body does, but that the icon of the body and the text of the dream are two different ways of representing the same person. And I'm curious if Shirin, you have thoughts about the ways in which whether in this work or in all of your work, how the confrontation, because so much of your work is also about the confrontation of the individual with the viewer or with the camera, the gaze of the individual, and what we can learn differently from confronting the body or the face in this way than we can from hearing their narrative in one way.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to mention that very often I think intuitively, I think about the text like the music on the film. You know, I feel it, that what music does in way of enhancing the atmosphere of the mood of the picture is what calligraphy does to a picture. You know, it sort of reiterates, or it sort of entices certain emotions. For me, what you were just saying, the reason I'm so interested in human body or portraiture is because I'm always very interested in that intersection between a person and the world, the inner and the outer world. I mean, I'm talking about myself as someone who's constantly digging deep into my own existential political issues and psychological issues, anxieties and fears, and yet I'm totally interested in the world and not just myself. So there's always an aspect of me that is sort of projected into the world, and then the world is projected in me. And so it's always this relationship between the self and the world, you know, that's the way I see it. And I think the photography has this ability to capture that human vulnerability, that we are just one thing in the arm of this universe, and we are subjected to so many things that we are not able to control. The political reality, the environment, health, you know, and so we are in many ways a victim of our own existence, you know, and we're just also survivors. And so for me, there's a deep sense of melancholy in this people's emotions. And that reminds me of when I photographed myself. And if people go back and look at the pictures of me when I photographed myself, there was same emotions and the same form of gaze was being projected, that as this beautiful Native American or that wonderful African American man's gaze gives, you know, that pure sense of vulnerability. But also this sense of dignity and pride and humanity and sense of survival. So for me, it's always about portraiture is how to create that balance, you know, between the pain and the sense of fragility of being a human, but yet rising above it and being, you know, the dignity in, and I don't know how to say it. It's always very spontaneous and intuitive, but for me, it was a great surprise to be able to photograph people that are not Muslims, are not Middle Eastern, and yet be able to, in my opinion, get from them that intensity of emotions.
Yes, dignity was the same. I had the same reaction, and so while there is that melancholy, you also have that power and kind of inner strength in some way. And through the Beaux-Arts salon style display, you also, in many ways, and again, whether this is just your audience generally, or if you have a thought about how critics have maybe interpreting this, whether you have an internalized critic voice in your head, that in many ways, standing in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by all of these images, just like Samin does in the film, you become the one who's the object of the gaze rather than the individuals around you, whether that's through the sheer number or through their dignity or the presentation of the works. And I'm curious how you may be trying to critique the way of voyeurism that is so typical of so much that's been written about you, and the ways in which you get told, you know, self-exoticizing or different ways in which your work is incorrectly interpreted, I would say.
Well, that's exactly why for so long I didn't even dare to photograph Americans, or even though I've lived here longer than my own country. And it was very daring of me to do that. And I've always insisted, I know there are a number of other photographers that have tried to capture America. And I always say, well, this is my perspective. This is my impression about America as an Iranian immigrant. This is not maybe what America looks like to you, but this is what it looks like to me, an accurate, picture of America, this diversity, and this sense of functional and dysfunctional reality that I see, the good and bad. But Charles, I had the same issue with the Iranian community because I'm always making work about Iran, but from a distance. Shoja mentioned something about the issue of distance. I don't, I'm American Iranian, but I'm not completely American. I'm not completely Iranian. I can never be accurate in my depiction about Iranians and the same about Americans. I'm a nomad, I'm a gypsy, I'm in between, and my gaze and my image is something of a hybrid. And therefore that has to be counted into the people's understanding of the work. But I felt that it was really important time for people like me to make their reflection about America loud and clear. And whether that's liked or disliked or graded 5 stars, 0 star, it's irrelevant. It seems like these days, in light of the time that we're living, those issues are irrelevant, those kind of judgments. It's just about communication.
And second to last question, and maybe Shoja will ask you this, and if Shirin has a thought as well, to continue that, do you think that this, as well as the film, because so much of it is in concert, as I said, there's a scene in which Samin is being surrounded by the photographs she's taken and others have taken, the headshots of these dreamers, and she's also kind of the object of the gaze rather than the one gazing. Is this a kind of commentary at all about what kind of way should we look at the other? And especially as Shirin was just talking about, that you're almost always othered from the community that you're in. You're othered from America, you're othered from Iran, but so many of us othered from ourselves, as we've talked about with the dreams. Is there something about this work that's communicating anything about how we should be viewing the other, and by proxy also viewing ourselves?
I think that it's generally a theme in Shirin's work. What is fascinating to me about Shirin's work is she deals with duality, right? And on many, many, many levels, on many, many layers. So it's a constant challenge between two opposite sides, that engages the viewer. So you're constantly in the center of and you're pushed to make a judgment, and then once you make that judgment, then you become you're judging yourself. So I think that dynamic in Shirin's work is really important from very, very early on, like from the early videos. If you look at that, that the audience is centered in the middle of the two opposing images, opposing video images. Then the images are opposite of each other themselves. It's male, female, black, white, so it's a constant battle of this duality that is going. And I think that by doing that, especially in these works, and you're absolutely, you pointed to something which was, I thought, very profound. I think that you enter a gallery space or museum space or whatever, and you're really the observer, right? You're the voyeur. You're judging the work. But in this series of work, that room, that salon, it's really the gazes upon you that are judging you. So it should be really unsettling. So you cannot be a voyeur in a sense, So you're being looked upon, and it's the power of this images, this community of people that you're encountering, that it becomes unsettling, and perhaps you are here the subject of their gaze, and they're looking at you and judging you. And I think it's a very accurate observation that you made of the work.
Shirin, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think both of you said it very well. I think I've said enough.
Well, then the last question I have, and you can choose to resist this question if you'd like, for either of you, I think appropriately, and I don't think anybody else has asked you this in an interview, but what was your last dream?
Well, actually, I dream all the time, and I have even turned some of my dreams into videos, like Roja was a dream of mine. But yeah, I don't know if I wanted to say
That's
publicly,
okay.
but I did have a very bad dream last night, in fact. And usually, Charles, my dreams, two people or three people are always present. One is my mother, who still lives in Iran, and she's now 90 years old. And that I always have a fear that if she passes, my last link to Iran would be cut. So it's like the loss of the motherland and the mother, and I'm always seeing her in my dreams. The other is my son. And the worst nightmares, I always see my son near me. And finally, Shoja. So I think that my fear of separation and anxiety that I have about displacement and worries, usually in my dreams, all those people that I feel very close to, they show up. Whatever the theme is, they're pretty much always there.
Shoja, would you like to answer that, or choose not to? Or maybe you don't remember.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that, you know, there's actually a line in the film, you know, it says that, you know, conversation is about dreams, and then if you don't remember it or record it right away, it's not a dream. Then the question is, what is it? It becomes a story, right? You know, you're doing, how much of it are you constructing? I think that's why you need to record your dream right away when it happens, you know, to remain really very faithful to dream itself. Otherwise, you start to make it into a story, which is not a bad thing to do, right?
No.
I've always wanted to really do a recording of my dreams when I wake up, but I've never done. So they have become all the stories in a sense, you know.
So you're always removed from your dream.
Yeah, and then I think that I have lucid dreams, you know, that I'm always, and the dreams are always really not good. They're on the border of nightmares, and then I become a hero in my dreams, and I start to change. I go back, I rewind, and then I start to control them in the direction that I want them to go, you know, which is very, you know, it's very interesting, you know.
Fortunate, in many of us would say. Well, I think that's a nice note on which to go to questions. If Henry, I can stop the sharing of the screen as well. If Henry wants to take over for the questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. It is great to hear you three in dialogue. So to begin with, we are going to take a question from Mandana. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much. This was really, really, I'm so glad the Brooklyn Rail did this. It's, I think you could go on for hours and hours talking about it. So I was lucky enough to have seen this already at the Gladstone. And as an immigrant, these films were so resonant. I'm basically reading my question in the chat. And I loved how you did it side by side, because the eye kind of does not know where to go to, but you are taking in all of the information at the same time. And how you express that very fine line between dreams and nightmares, which can happen in your own dreams at night. You think everything is going well and it doesn't. So there was a sense of voyeurism, because one does think that one's dreams are a very private escape for oneself. And it's the one place you can truly be free. But I think one of the allegories you have is that even that may not be free forever for us, that there's that sense of authoritarianism that even when you don't expect it, can take over. But what I'd like to ask, if you want to respond to that, I'd love it. But I also would like to ask how, what you were thinking about with the actor's delivery, how that kind of underscored both the themes that you were discussing and maybe was also in conflict with the themes that you were exploring, and also with the use of black and white. Right now I'm thinking, do I dream in black and white or color? And what was the purpose of using the black and white?
The question is for me?
Yeah.
Hi, Mandana. First of all, I just want to explain that I've always been very interested in this composite creation of videos because it gives the audience a chance to be very participant in terms of sort of putting the puzzle together. In a way, the audience become the editor of the story, and I really enjoy that. I've done that a number of times on opposite sides, but here you have two different narratives, one really highly fictional, the other one more documentary, going on at the same time. And the only thing that is constant in both sides is this female character. And I think that for a patient's audience, I think it's a challenge to be able to sort of, you know, navigate in between the different realms, one in Iran, one in US, one is really a dreamy situation, one is reality. Anyway, to me, that's a way of turning the art and the audience into participants and active participants as opposed to passive participants. The other thing about what Shoja said is right, that I'm so interested in duality, about the black and white, the nature versus the, you know, this industrial claustrophobic interior space, you know, and we have done that consistently. And what I love about Sheila, the actress, and if you look at some of my recent work, some of my muses, subconsciously, I have been gravitating toward women that somehow have similar physique, you know, very small, black, with big eyes, and where, you know, and, you know, there's something that I have somehow saw myself in them, maybe the younger version of myself, and somehow being my alter ego, etc. And I think with Sheila Vand, who's an incredible actress, who, by the way, was the star of The Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night, in that fantastic film, I felt that she also played herself. You know, she's also a very, very interesting, you know, young woman who also is an immigrant, but most of her life she's been raised here. She has a different relationship to Iran and the landscape of Southwest. But we have very similar situations in terms of emotionally. And so the character of Simin eventually became something between me and Sheila. And she was, once she understood, and she's now also the main role at the feature film. And again, she was able to embody something that I really feel that is a cross point between the two of us.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you, Mandana, for the question. Next, we're going to our artistic director and publisher, Fong Bui. Fong, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Shirin. Thank you, Shoja. And Charles, for this amazing conversation. I usually go last, but I realized that I need to join a Zoom meeting at 2:30. So therefore, I asked the question before I go, if you don't mind. I love what Shoja is saying about the layers in your work, Shirin, and your both your collaboration, really. And the idea also with the indirect vision, you know, Shirin, the condition of being immigrants or in between places, be it the condition of being dislocated, is that you always have the advantage, as much as there's a advantage given to that condition, is that you're not in the happening, so to speak. You're not in that space. It's like an actor, actress on stage. we are not in that condition. You and Shoja are not. So you have the advantage observing the happening, the play or the, the spectacle of some sort. But my question is this, the layers imply multiplicity. So the first thing is indirect vision, which is you have the pleasure of observing the whole thing. And then there also the right to opacity, which is what Edouard Glissant talk about. We don't need to make things that are so incredibly simplistic or easy to be digested. So my point is between indirect vision and the desire for multiplicity or the layers, so to speak. My question is that how would you know when to welcome it or when to deploy the repetition from one event from previous experience, get transformed to another way of looking at it? Does repetition means anything in that creative process, which embody the memory from the previous project?
I go first, and I'd like Shoja to respond to it, and I hope I understood your question right. One of the things that, for example, in the Land of Dreams, that we seem to be doing simultaneously, like Shoja says about layers, the film is at once a sort of critique of American culture and visiting the people of different households, representing different ethnicity and economic class and psychological and political spaces. But yet at once is about this woman who is Iranian and her own individual dilemma as someone who's conflicted between her own emotional state and being Iranian and belonging to this other society that sort of demands different things from her. So I think what Shoja meant, and I think that's what's really kind of difficult to balance sometimes, is how you sort of draw that boundary between, how much the film really emphasizes as a social critique of the, now whether it is this or before about Iranian culture or whatever, and then how much of it does it linger on this individual dilemma that her issues could be political, but also not political. It could be just existential. And this always is something that I go back to myself because, as a person that I'm so invested in understanding what's going around me politically in this country, in my country, in the world, but yet I'm facing on daily basis my own smaller little, issues as a human being. So I think this is something that when you're constructing a 20-minute video or a 2-hour film, how to balance those elements where, and also how to not become overly polemical about your reading of a culture or, being over the top of being too liberal or too this way or that way, but also not being overly sentimental about how much are you projecting about the emotionality of the film or the character's pain. Yeah. So it's really a fine balance, and that's why it takes us forever to write something, to shoot something, and then to edit it. We are a very big critic of ourselves. I don't know if I answered your wonderful question correctly, but Shoja, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I found, I think, if when one makes a work of art or any attempt, at representation, let's say, I think that there's some thinking process, there's some, investigation, using some kind of attempt to put things together. But truly, you're looking at life, right? I mean, you're looking at your own life, you're looking at everything that is unfolding around you, and it's incredibly and always opaque. Life is opaque, right? I mean, when and if you came to an understanding of life, please let me know. I would. So it's, I mean, life is, and I remember David Lynch is like someone asks him, you know, why your films? I don't understand anything. Why is it so always so? You know, I can't understand anything. I was like yelling at him and saying, "Do you fucking understand life? You know, if you understand life, let me know." So this is, I think that the closer you become, the more you're honest and the closer you're into the experience of life, your own life, and what is unfolding for you. And if you stick to that, it by its very nature is going to be layered and layered and layered. And then the rest of it is really like, okay, how should I communicate this to the audience the best way? What are the techniques that came before me? How could you shape this so the critics would like it? And, then, it's like things of that nature, which is really like borrowed things, right? But not truthful things. So I think that the opacity comes from really, if you're honest and you're really looking at the flow of life and what is happening, then it becomes part of the work, by its very nature.
Thank you, Shoja. It's so interesting because we were talking about Hannah Arendt. My friend Jerome Cohn is her executor, of this state, and he just came out the book bearing her famous dictum, "Thinking Without a Banister," which I've been reading back and forth. Shoja, as artists, we need to really amplify and inspire our fellow human beings to be courageous and trust their own, calling, so to speak. Not resting upon any reason for justification for the action and whatnot. But I was also thinking of both of you in some ways being the product, as you say earlier, as I was as well growing up, was basically French education, at least for other culture. The interesting thing about multiculturalism, which began with Shirin, Woman of Allah, and then soon after that would be our friend Ai Weiwei. We are product of Western education, Shoja. Maybe we aspire towards a certain condition of democratic vistas, very much so. That's why we admire that model, of human freedom and whatnot. But I think in some ways, what you've been doing is undo all of that Western learning and then trying to transfuse it from the subject of your own cultural upbringing, heritage, as we see it today. I mean, one doesn't need to bring back all of the Western education and impose our own creative works. And I think that's something that you both have been doing so effectively, so great subtlety. It's definitely implicitly or explicitly in the work. And so that's, I don't know whether it's a question or not, it's just a comment. And so thank you so much. I leave the mic to someone else's. Hello. Back to you, Henry.
Thank you, Fong. We are now going to move over to a question from Ali. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello. Hello, Shirin. Hello, Shoja and Charles. I just talked about the magical realism that you mentioned in your statement. I believe it's not that brand new, and there are lots of common examples in this style in the last millennium in Persian literature, in Farsi, and even in Arabic in the Middle East. And I guess it's not related, especially related to the recent dictatorship or the regime. It's a part of our culture, actually, and metaphoric literature is a iconic style in our history. it's just a comment. It's not a question actually. I just wanted to share it to you.
Absolutely. I was just, for example, my draw to the magic realism was the book of Woman Without Men, which we turned into a screenplay and we made into a movie. And that story, you know, even as magic realist novel, she went to prison for a number of years. Shahnoush Parsi-Pur, the author, and even though it was quite enigmatic, and so I was talking about. You're absolutely right. I mean, Shoja knows far more than I do about history of literature in Iran, but I've been very drawn myself to the authors who have used metaphors to talk more politically, and or at least about the issues of women. For example, in the case of Woman Without Men was also sacrilegious, and she was arrested and imprisoned for its work. But you're absolutely right. There's number of fantastic writers from Iran that have, you know, sort of embraced magic realism, not for political reason, because of the style. But I would say quite a few do use, even in filmmaking, the language that you see in Iranian cinema. It's quite, you know, subversive and candid, but it's very political at the same time, you know. But you're absolutely right. I should not make a generalization.
I should also say that it's not the monopoly of Iranians, you know. Metaphor, like fantasy, imagination, all of those things, simile, all of that is, you find it throughout world history and world literature, you know. It's like Spanish literature. I mean, that's the modern magic realism starts from that. The old magic realism goes to 1001 Nights, right? I mean, so you know, humans, you know, us as humans, you know, our experience of life is mysterious, and if we want to express that mystery, we have to use metaphors. We have to use images. We have to use imagination, you know, and it's everywhere in English literature, French literature, Spanish literature, movies of all like cultures. So I think that they have a tendency to say that, oh, it's only us, you know. No, that's not such a thing, you know.
Ali, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I wrote an essay about 5 years ago about Iranian contemporary artists, storytellers, and mentioned that matter about your works and compare it to Kamaluddin Behzad's paintings. And I can send it to you as a link here. In contemporary practices, it was in the...
I would love that.
Thanks again.
And thank you, Ali. We're now going to move over to a question from G.E. Schwartz. You should be able to turn on your microphone.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. Today, both Brunel and Kafka have come up a couple of times, or at least I believe, and I was struck by both of them seem to work a lot of times in parallels. And it seems as though your work here seems to be working in parallels. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about their influence, if at all, of those two artists. Thank you.
Well, I would start first. I was very struck by The Trial, the film of Orson Welles by Kafka's story. I mean, we all read Kafka since we were young in Iran. And I've been really seen a lot of parallel in those type of stories relating to my Iranian background. And then with Buñuel, I love the sense of surrealism that is not on your face, like you see it and you don't, you know. It's like, and working with Jean-Claude Carrier, who wrote all the masterpieces of scripts for Buñuel, longtime collaborators. I've been very privileged to hear a lot of stories by Jean-Claude about Buñuel, and we of course, watched a lot of Buñuel's films. And I think the use of satire, humor, absurdity, and surrealism in his work, it's just fantastic. And you'll see that in the feature film that we're making. Well, of course, Jean-Claude is one of the main writers, so there's a lot of that kind of parallels. But yeah, I mean, I think both Shoja and I are both fascinated by those two individuals, Kafka and Buñuel. And Shoja, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I made a film actually based on true stories of Kafka as well. So I've studied at least and Buñuel, both Buñuel and Kafka. You know, I studied Kafka endlessly, and you know, they're amazing, right? I mean, they're great because you don't understand them, so that they're good to me. You know, as far as the heart, they say beneath understanding, they make sense.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
And we are going to take one last question before moving over to our poet. And this comes from our special projects editor, Nick. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Well, thank you so much, Shirin and Shoja and Charles, for a really wonderful conversation. Shirin and Shoja are just like dear family to the Rail, and it's always such a pleasure to work with you both on various events and conversations. So I hope my question's not too simple, but our very first NSE, of course, was with Shirin and Shoja joining us. And that was about a year ago. And I can somewhat recall that in that conversation, I don't know if it was you, Shirin, that asked it, or if someone asked the question to you, but it was something because as we were in that moment, everyone was beginning to go into their homes to quarantine. This is when everything was starting to shut down. And the question was, are there older or past projects or ideas that are coming back to you right now? And I thought of that because I'm curious if that's resonant with both of you, Shirin and Shoja, considering that, you know, a year later and all the things you've done since the pandemic kind of came down on us. And I'm just curious if you're now both maybe still thinking about some things towards the past, or if you're kind of fully into the future, or.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I remember clearly when you contacted us and we said, Zoom, what is Zoom? We didn't have any, so we had to do it by phone. But, you know, it's really interesting how this year was one of the most challenging years for us, but also one of the most productive years of our lives. We managed to go back into the script of Land of Dreams, but go to New Mexico in the middle of pandemic from September to end of November to shoot the film. And it was incredibly, really difficult and challenging. So for me, I think of it not, I just see it as a year that actually a lot of dreams came true for me within this particular circumstances. And so I did, and also the exhibition that you see that is at Gladstone. So I find this year an incredible year of reflection, but being able to be very thorough with things that normally, like with the script work that we were doing, normally we would be so distracted by so many things, but being day after day in a lockdown, we were really able to focus, Shoja and I, in you know, revising, and eventually everything was very, very much taken care of as like, this is our only chance, you know, and we never took anything for granted, and including going to New Mexico, we knew we could be shut down any day. And in fact, we were the only film production that was not shut down because we were careful and we got what we wanted. So I'm just really grateful that we turned this very challenging year into a year of productivity and art.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. If it's all right, Could we squeeze in just one more question before moving to the poet? We just got a question in the chat from Ken. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Oh, let's see here. There we
I
go.
think you're
Okay.
muted. Oh, great.
Yep, there we go. Sorry.
No
Thanks so much for letting me ask that question. I was gonna be okay with being too late and letting you guys move on. Yeah, I was really thinking, considering the fact that Shirin and Shoja are artists who are shifting between visual and written and spoken mediums all the time, and what effect that has on the meaning and affects of the same metaphor when communicated between these different mediums. So I'm just wondering if that's something you think about, and what you think that does to the work.
That's such an excellent question, and I'm so glad you brought it up. First of all, this is first time for me where I approach a certain topic or concept or narrative and apply it to 3 different languages: photography, video, and a feature-length film. And this is something I've never done before. I've always separated the different languages. And so, for example, the way that the narrative is designed for the videos and the way it's shot, you know, black and white and quite enigmatic, 2-channel, you know, screens versus the feature film with, you know, fully professional cast and full narrative and all of that. And then the photography, because the main protagonist is a photographer. So, you know, it's really interesting because in many ways they all really are separate, but they're all really integral, you know. And this is something I enjoy because I think it must be at some point when we finish the movie, very interesting for the audience to be able to see the 3 different type of work and be able to see how they connect and disconnect and how they translate same idea in, you know, but in completely different forms. And that's something I enjoyed a lot. Like, for example, I have a protagonist playing in the video, going around collecting people's dreams and portrait. Then I am the one who's going to the people, taking their portrait and writing on them. And then in the movie, she actually doesn't work for the colony, but the same woman works for the American Census Bureau, who's now added the question about what is your last dream for the American citizen. So for me, this kind of very interesting connections are really beautiful, you know, and that, but yet each one is very faithful to the language that was designed for, you know. It's not like we just took the feature film and tried to make an excerpt of it for a video art, or took a picture from the video and put it in the gallery. No, they were designed as portrait photography, video art, and feature-length film for movie theaters, not for a gallery, you know, where you could sit on a, you know, a theater and watch it. So this is something, of course, over the years, I've been working, you know, on these 3 mediums separately. So I've had some experience working with different audience, different collaborators, and different institutions like galleries versus film producers, etc. And it's very interesting for them to collapse into one project, I have to say, artistically.
But,
yeah.
But it's quite different. I think that if I understood your question right, is that the application of these metaphors or the things that you're like, you know, that could, you know, ironies, metaphors, similes, all of those things in different mediums, right? I mean, how would it differ in different mediums? And they're completely different. I mean, like, for example, like, you know, one of the experiences we just had in directing this film, this new film that is going to come out, is that Jean-Claude, the French writer, his language is very ironic, right? It's a linguistic irony, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. But it was absolutely hard to communicate that irony to the actors. And if you don't get that linguistic irony, you cannot deliver that linguistic irony, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So this is like, you know, that's like, but the situational or dramatic irony is much, much easier than the linguistic irony. So you could even the actors could get it and deliver it, and the audience would not, you know how to grasp linguistic irony.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very different, and that's and it's okay if people get it or don't get it or whatever. That I don't think it's a bad thing or a good thing, you know. But they're different, very different, in different forms.
All right. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Great. Well, thank you, Ken, for the question, and thank you everyone who brought questions today to the Q&A, and Shirin and Shoja for your responses. As with the last time you were here, the Brooklyn Rail has a tradition of ending lunch with a poem. And so we've carried this into our community events. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate, Ben Fama, to the stage. A writer based in New York City, Ben Fama is the author of Death Wish, Fantasy, and the chapbooks Odalisque, Cool Memories, New Waves, and Aquarius Rising. He's also the author of the artist book Malwitch, and Ben is the co-founder of Wonder Press. And please check out the chat in just a moment where I'll post links to everything I just mentioned. Take it away, Ben.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you, Shirin and Shoja, for that great conversation. My brain was firing on all pistons, thinking about all the different things to respond to. I particularly liked talking about poetry and images and poetry and just like dream logic. I particularly am interested in condensation and displacement. And Shirin, you also mentioned enigma, which I think is an undervalued part of dreaming, and just like quality of just like being alive and like oscillating through the signifiers of a culture. You mentioned like the American project and like its failures. Anyways, so that's all kind of informing this choice what I decided to read while listening. It's called Fantasy 2.0. Budweiser toilet Christmas, Swan ice star, pushy internet date, unauthorized card activity, allow full screen, cod row smear, politically off trend, promises, 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 intoxicated by melancholy, dreamy Hudson loft, Criterion ex-girlfriend collection, office space available, branded, targeted, data mined, holiday autonomous zone, protest groups collide, poetry, funeral party, call your dealer, sex club relapse, product in beta, valley, forehand volley, Long Island blowjob, repetitive, mass, ideation, wake up, elegy, dash cam attack, wet coke summer, Cerveza ad agency, Queens horror subscription, shade cushioned overtime, podcast one studio, Mazda Miata Avenue, better than photos, Gates residential, brave Portland Kardashian, caught on tape, viral high school injustice, rich lazy frenemy, millennial police violence, institutional misogynistic support, tepid content strategy, sad journal aesthetic, tears in Bora Bora, read somewhere that everything's fine, I like, hashtag surfaces, I'm alive, too soon, invade meeting, Ford Explorer, imported sand, prestige economy, green screen, pilot episode, closed set, unsealed pleasure, recalcitrant, hateful, verified avatar, nude camisole, give emotion, affect block, beastly, worshipful, public shaming, iPhone, Ouroboros, internet rash, generation punish, spiritual menace, Hollywood beginning, working death, dead union, radicalized, suspicion, page 6, everyone's there, spring break, IED, Scorpio. That's it, thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Yeah,
And
really beautiful.
thank you so much to Shirin and Shoja and Charles for the fantastic conversation. At the Brooklyn Rail, we are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. So please consider making a contribution to our anniversary fundraising campaign to keep the Rail and our special projects free, relevant, and independent, like this New Social Environment conversation series and our special project, We the Immigrants. Every amount matters to us, and so please check out the chat where I will put some information about that. And join us tomorrow, or on Monday at 1 p.m. for a conversation between the artist Eddie Martinez with Jason Rosenfeld, which will conclude with a poetry reading from Ali Black. And you should now all be able to unmute yourselves and you can say your goodbyes on your way out.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Ben.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
So
Bye.
nice. Thank you, Brooklyn Red.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shirin.